Dan. It's a remote podcast.
This is Dan Wright, and I am in Muncie, Indiana.
This is Dave Poncé. I'm in Lafayette, Indiana.
My wife and I have a brick and mortar studio location downtown Muncie, as you know. She is a fellow artist and creative, and she works in silk. And just within the last couple of weeks, the First Lady of Indiana visited her studio.
It's very cool, man. Very cool.
Carrie has really accomplished some things, and Carrie has now been a multi-year participant in the Hoosier Salon. She's an Indiana artisan and has been for some time. She is another person for whom expertise really means something, and she doesn't have to be interested in something for very long before she starts getting really good at it.
Yeah. This isn't the first time that the First Lady of Indiana made a connection to Carrie, right? Didn't something happen a couple, 3 years ago with some scarves?
Carrie was commissioned to do gifts of state for when Governor Holcomb goes to foreign places. He gives Indiana-related gifts of state as thank yous for their time and for their audience, and just bring gifts. So these were silk drawings of the state bird and the state flower and the state tree. She did a long form that has the state poem. We have a state poem. Indiana has a state poem.
There once was a Hoosier from Nantucket, I think is how it starts. Talking about state gifts, Dan. When I taught school in West Hartford, Connecticut, one of the things that was so great about living in that part of the country was you're 2 hours from Boston, 2 hours from New York City, a couple hours from FDR's home in Hyde Park. And in the museum, they had some of the more outstanding state gifts given to FDR by different heads of state. There was a gift there from Anastasio Somoza. There was a strongman named Somoza who ruled Nicaragua as a dictator for many years. But anyway, what Somoza gave to FDR was this, I'm not kidding, it's like that size, maybe larger. It was a piece of solid gold that had been mined in Nicaragua that happened to have the shape sort of the country. When I saw that state gift, I'm just sitting there staring at it thinking Somoza had been in the news, and I'm trying to remember the name of the revolutionary sort of political group that took over there, Dan. I'm gonna have to pause and look it up and then insert into the show at some point.
Please put elevator music behind it so it goes...
Right, done. But anyway, yeah, what was your live music performance, jams, stuff like this week?
My Monday evening jam is a group of people that call themselves a bluegrass jam, but nobody pays attention to a bluegrass repertoire. And I'm ashamed of myself a little bit because I have not paid more attention to that. Like there are some songs where I can put on a country sort of sounding voice because I grew up listening to that kind of stuff, and like I think there's some Lester Flatt songs that I could really sing and do that in that nasal. It's almost Portuguese how nasal that the tonality of bluegrass is in the singing. But anyway, the Monday evening group was great. There was a big group there, but also one of the guys who's only with us seasonally has come back for the season.
I remember this is almost 10 years ago. I was still in Nashville Songwriters Association, and I was going to chapter meetings in Indianapolis. And then I went to a 2-day kind of workshop. And I mentioned this guy, I think before in one of the other podcasts, but his name is Steve Seskin, Seskin. I don't know whether Steve is still with us or not, but he had been a co-writer on some very cool stuff. And he was doing a workshop. And one of the things that I opted to do as part of the workshop, this is typically the format for these kinds of things where you'll come in on like a Friday night and there will be some sort of an early session and maybe a dinner and a campfire type thing. Or if it's at a hotel, and this one was in the Chicagoland area in a suburb, everybody gets together and jams, like in the meeting room or something like that. And so it's a nice way to break the ice. And then the next day, that Saturday, is mostly from like 8 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon or so is the session.
Yeah, okay.
And then after that, and the following day as well, if you choose to stay, and I did, typically the people who are running the workshops will do one-on-one sessions for an extra charge.
Oh, okay,
And
but
so
that's
for
pretty nice.
yeah, for songwriters, it's really great because you can take somebody that's a Grammy nominee in this case, you can throw your work at him and go, here it is.
Yeah.
Anyway, in my 1 hour session talking with him, and I'm just doing lyrics and giving him some ideas for melodically what I feel like works for those lyrics. But one of the things I showed him was a bluegrass style song that I had written the lyrics to, and I liked the concept of it. And he said to me, "What's your thinking about the trajectory of getting that out there to expose that to bluegrass musicians?" And I said, "Steve, I have no idea." And he said, "Well, a non playing creative songwriter, you're really going to be a little bit hamstrung in how bluegrass musicians are exposed to because," and here's what he said. He said, "Most of the bluegrass songs that I've sold in my life, I've sold because I camped with them and hung out at the campfire and introduced them there." And he said,
Wow.
I would be at bluegrass, meetings,
Yeah.
concert weekends or whatever, where the best
Yeah.
bluegrass acts in the US were there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they're sitting around the campfire with you.
Yeah.
And you throw something out there knowing that those decision makers are sitting around the campfire. So he said to me, "You might try to attend some of those. And even if you do nothing more than share some ideas about lyrics around the campfire, that's not an invalid way to do it." I never did, of course, but it's what Steve Seskin said to me about if you want to get to the people potentially
Yeah.
who might actually cut that song or collaborate with you to get a melody written for it.
Right. Right.
You
Right.
really need to go to those kinds of places and camp with them and hang out at the campfire. Now that,
Yeah.
I didn't know.
Yeah.
So if you don't
Well, I
like
am not.
camping, and I don't.
Yeah. I no. I'll stay at the hotel.
Yeah,
But traveling to play music and like I don't think I'll travel a little bit of a drive to go listen to music, but like I am not a big enough audiophile to schedule something that would seem like a vacation, even a weekend away to go
sure.
see somebody perform.
Yeah,
That's not to say that I wouldn't ever, but the majority of the music that I am in love with now exists primarily in recordings that I can get to pretty easily.
yeah, yeah,
So I'll see live expressions of those as I can, or even because I like the participation of being a musician my own self, I'll play those or learn to play those. Like I've been playing September Song now the whole month. And trying to I've got the sheet music in front of me. I'm trying to I was telling another friend this another day, just a couple of days ago on Tuesday evening, trying to have my relationship to the guitar fretboard be the notes in front of me on the printed page. Most guitar players are musicians of the ears. The soundscape of where we are is more important than the paper. They don't relate to what are these notes. It's a polytonal polyphonic instrument. So that's a chord rather than that's a single string that's where the melody, which also in its way is telling you what the chord melody is if you want to that's where jazz comes from, right? Chasing the chord melody in four-part harmony with the form of the song. Anyway, I'm trying to think those thoughts for the first time. I'm it's just outside of me being good enough to do that, which is I think right at the crest of the wave of where I should be as a student.
yeah.
I
Well,
stink at it.
I I think I've talked to you about this before. I went many years ago when I was teaching school in Connecticut. I took 6 months worth of classical guitar lessons.
You did tell me that.
University of Hartford Music School had a couple, husband and wife actually at the time that had retired, but both of them were amazing classical guitar players and teachers. And when they retired, they were teaching some lessons, and he was teaching people that were more advanced, and she was teaching beginners.
Okay.
And so I went and got my $100 Yamaha, starter classic guitar
Yeah.
and started taking lessons. And let me tell you, there ain't no discussion about chords. for the first 6 months for sure. It is all learning to play notes. It's learning to play notes. It's learning to play scales. It's, all of the sheet music. The Carcassi method is what she used. But all of it was learning to pick with your fingers and learning to pick out the notes as you're
Yeah.
playing them. And
Yeah.
the way that my the way that my attempt at playing classical guitar came to an end was one weekend when I went to the music store and I bought a chord chart and I stuck it on the wall. And if you've been taking classical guitar lessons for a while, you get pretty good at strumming. You get pretty good at that intentional use of your thumb and fingers to
Yeah.
strike the notes that you're trying to achieve on the strings. And what I realized was, wow, I could put my fingers here and listen to that. And it turned into me doing things like all of the early songs that people learn.
Yes.
It's all the early rock. And anyway, I had started really because I could hear in my head. I would describe this to my friends even in high school and in college. I would say, they're more like jazzy chords. They're more complicated chords. So
Yes.
I did that with Amazing Grace, and I go marching into my lesson and I say to her, "Hey, listen, I want to play something that I've been working on for you." And I start using chords and playing Amazing Grace with these really complicated chords. And she's just doing this. Her eyes get big and then she just goes like, no, 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 no. And then she kind of stops me and she goes, why are you doing that?" And I'm like, well, I just think it's really cool. This is one of the things I really want to do with the guitar. And we had like 2 more lessons. And after that, she was just like, David, I think maybe what you ought to do is just go ahead and pursue playing those chords and doing that. And I think we'll be done. It was clear to her that I had moved into Popland. And then, of course, I didn't stay with it. I didn't take lessons from anybody else. But for about another 6 months, I was like, wow, look at me. I can really do this and sound good. And there were no dynamics or any of those other things. But yeah, I understand that idea of it being a very different path to learn to play a guitar note for note versus playing chords. And it's not like they're mutually exclusive, of course, although I think for beginners they mostly are.
Well, there's a reason why it's the most popular instrument in history. It just is, because it is so easy to access,
Yeah.
and it's developed now to a point where it doesn't have the novelty of a ukulele. It's a little more complicated than that, but, I mean, you're only the big instrument that's polytonal is the piano, and I heard a guitar teacher that I like, Steve Stein, he said, "Playing a guitar is like having 6 pianos hooked to each other." And the first time I heard that, I dismissed it, and I thought, "No, that's not right." It's like, but because the shapes are symmetrical that you are grabbing hold of in relation to what the key is and where the notes of that key are, I understand now, like, setting aside a prejudice in the moment, going, "No, listen to what he's saying. He's a lot
Yeah.
better than you are. Listen to what he's saying." And so the guitar is it's a simpler than a piano polyphonic instrument. Now, an inside joke in my own house has nothing to do with music, but because my wife wants to describe emotional things to me sometimes, I remind her, "You have the emotional capability of a piano, and I am a guitar. I have 6 emotions, and that's all the strings I've got. So, your melodies are so complex, but I can't do that in my."
That's funny. That's
Well,
funny.
it's a simple instrument, but because of that, when I go out and play like an open mic thing, sometimes there are families sitting at the table. In fact, here's the thing I shared with the owner of a local venue that I go to and play that is an idea that you told me about, which is that you've been to jams where their first hour is dedicated to 17, 18, 19-year
Mhm.
old people.
Yeah.
And the smart of that, for one reason, it's exposure for them, yes, of course, but also as a restaurateur, it's families coming in to eat a meal and listen to their young person perform. maybe more than once if they become regulars, and, like, it's just a
Right.
super smart thing to do.
Well,
Um,
the Jazz Club of Lafayette is where they had been doing that. My early experience with the Jazz Club of Lafayette, they were meeting at a venue. They don't anymore because the venue doesn't exist anymore.
okay, okay,
They were meeting at a venue at which they could have, even though there was full bar service there, they were getting a permit that allowed underage kids to come into the venue because it wasn't a bar.
okay,
It was like a
okay.
wedding venue space.
Yes, right,
And the
right.
owners at the time were very generous and they were actually paying the jazz club musicians to come in and play the jams. And
Yeah,
so the way that it worked was the Jazz Club of Lafayette, Indiana, they have had for many years a scholarship related to the great saxophone player, the late great Tony Zamora, and so, Betty Zamora still lives here in the area. Tony Zamora lived in Lafayette, West Lafayette for several years. He came from the Champaign-Urbana area where he had been also an educator, but he was in Purdue University programs there. But he was a reed player of note that a
okay,
lot of people knew regionally and even multi-regionally. But anyway, he was a big friend of the local jazz scene and they ended up creating a scholarship in his name that essentially is a performance scholarship that is granted in April every year during, National Jazz Month. And the
okay,
way that it works is local high school students, and I think they have to be within Tippecanoe County, which is the county seat. But essentially, what happens is they come to that April jam,
yeah,
and there is a live performance for judges and then a winner is chosen, I think, the following week. And so they've maintained that. And when Tony was still able to do that, he would come to those and he would be the one that would award those. And he lived into his 90s, I believe. But
nice.
anyway, one of the pieces that came along with the Jazz Club of Lafayette doing that was their intention to have every one of their Wednesday night jams, they have them in April and October, from 7 to 8 o'clock to be only people who are under the age of 21.
Okay,
And it was a really cool thing because, as you said, even though it wasn't really a restaurant, but it was a place where parents could come in,
yep,
younger
yep,
siblings could come in, and everybody could watch that. And of course, for all the people who were staying later into the night for the rest of the jam, it was just a wonderful, very uplifting thing to see that
yes,
you saw these kids that were coming from jazz band programs in local schools and they were coming into that venue and then they'd get a chance to play with the house band that were really accomplished
yes,
musicians.
yes, yes.
And that connection obviously was very inspiring on both sides of the coin. It was a really, really cool thing. And then that venue went away, sadly, and it's going to become an expanded license branch in Lafayette. And so the Jazz Club of Lafayette now goes to the Knickerbocker Saloon, which is bills itself as Indiana's oldest bar. It's 21 and over only, so we can't do the high school thing
All right,
anymore. And
okay,
what they do for the Zamora scholarship is they actually travel to the different schools and do the performances that way. And still award it,
okay,
still do it
yeah.
at one of the April jams. But anyway, it's a really cool idea to try to be more inclusive and to bring more people into local jazz jams and performances and to validate a lot of what these kids are doing at the high school level, with jazz band.
Well, because of the I like gypsy jazz, it's come up every time so far, and to even do any sort of music that propagates that, like, one of the things I mean to do here in the next it's not a jam, but, like, we have our Muncie, Indiana, what has become, I think, one of Muncie's fine dining restaurants, and there's not a lot, it's Muncie, there's only 66,000 of us, I think. But our downtown Adams Street Chop House
Mhm.
has a really lovely patio area and has some live musical performances that they have had on their patio. And it's a place where well, it's fine dining. There is an idea of refinement that's going
Yeah.
on here, and I understand that they are programming blues in Indiana is always going to be right. I don't care what you're serving.
Right.
It's
No,
always, like it's always going to
100%.
be right.
Yep.
Yeah. So, but like I think I'm going to go over here in the next couple of days and go see if I can go talk to those fellas when it's not, lunchtime or evening time because
Yeah.
no, I would like to go. There is some I like a jam part of the thing I like about a jam is the other musicians then are the audience that you are jamming along with, but
Right.
also I've been to places where, people have parked lawn chairs and they're listening to this. I've been to
Mhm.
indoor ones where it's funny, I've been to bluegrass jams that were mostly gospel-themed things that there were people over there on what amounted to, like, high school cafeteria tables playing euchre and all kinds of
Yeah.
cards,
Yeah.
but for the 2 hours that they were there, it really did feel like, "I am at the campground right now." It is
Yeah.
inside, and there's a water fountain, and it's, "Hey, I didn't have to camp to have this experience." That's for
Yeah.
if somebody was selling hot dogs outside,
Yeah.
that maybe could work. Um,
Yeah.
but I like the playing with the other people like that, and I like that here, at least in Indiana, we have access to some musical jams that we were talking about that earlier on the phone today. It's a thing to talk about, if not in this podcast, in another one, because we're 40, almost 43 minutes in of the how important music is in what the culture of Indiana is, even as an exported culture of like some of the heart of music for the country is here in Indiana. Not all of it. I'm not making that claim. But we have a rich musical history here
Yeah.
that you and I were talking about earlier today on the phone. And it's fun, especially as you learn things about the songs that you're performing. It's fun to hear Indiana connections to because there's a lot of them. And it's fun to hear the guy who travels to go listen to performances and coming to so Dave Ali has quite an original, interesting thing happening that just doesn't happen everywhere. He has a music jam that's jazz that if you put your name on the list, you will perform with world-class musicians tonight. That is, hey, I'm proud of Indiana for
Yeah.
having that's a
Well,
thing.
it's I did some looking around just to see where other jazz jams are, and there definitely are jazz jams throughout the US, of course, not bluegrass, jazz jams. So
Right.
these are places where you're expected to come play a fairly specific group of songs, and what's gonna fit into that, all the Gypsy Jazz catalog, of course, is gonna fit into there, all of the 19 teens all the way up until whenever. Experimental jazz is gonna get thrown in there, although you don't see that very much in jazz
Mhm.
jams. Mostly
Okay.
what you see are people who have come out of circumstances where they are learning swing band types of music in like a high school program where there's solos involved in that that might seem a little bit like bebop improvisation. And then when you get into the university level, these are people that are really pursuing bebop. That's what's happening. And what is happening at the Jazz Kitchen in Indianapolis is, and there are some other places that do this as well, but not many, as it turns out, especially in major cities, it isn't that common. You really don't have gatekeepers on who gets on the stage that much.
Okay.
And so what'll happen at the Jazz Kitchen is there is a sign up list there and anybody can get up there and sign up on the list. I just had a conversation with a guy a week and a half ago, and he and his wife are in a band, and he's a pretty good guitar player. She's a really good singer. And they bring the whole band in sometimes and do their three numbers. But he said to me, I'm a little self conscious about playing here because so much of what we do is blues. And I said to him, his name was also Dave. I said, hey, Dave, you don't have to apologize for that. That's the root of this tree here, and nobody's really going to take umbrage at you coming in and playing blues.
Mhm.
It's not a problem.
Mhm.
But once you start pushing into country and bluegrass and post 1950s rock and roll, then it really starts to feel a little bit like the moment is being misappropriated.
Yes.
Nobody gets in your grill about it. They will stop you from continuing if you don't have anything else to do. They'll just go, "Hey,
Right.
this is a jazz jam, so
Thank
thanks,
you for
thanks
coming this evening.
thanks very much, and,
Yes.
we would just wanted to let you know we appreciate you being here, but that's all for you for
Well,
now,"
I'm assuming
you
all right,
know,
like,
and
I'm
that's
assuming
fine. Yeah, yeah,
of
yeah.
course, I've seen this spectrum, though. I've seen this spectrum of musicians, I think. This person loves this song and this song and this song, or at least can sing them adequately, like the recording that they heard.
Yep, yep.
The other end, and I don't think that this is an end per se, but somebody who could do an evening of 30 Charlie Christian songs and understand all the differences in the recordings and
Yeah.
curate an evening for you. And that's from beginner to advanced level right there in the spectrum. But you want the person at the low end, though, to at least come out of the book.
Well,
But
I
regardless,
mean, the musicians will flatly deny certain keys
okay.
that get
All
called.
right.
They will
Okay.
just say, "Nope, we're not doing that."
We're not doing that in that
Yeah.
key. That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
All of me in A flat. No.
Yeah. It's and the other thing that happens, and this happened just last week, where the musicians are so good that it's easy sometimes for people to go in there and just think, well, they can play anything. I used to think
Yeah.
that. I really
Yeah.
did.
Yeah.
I used to think, oh, these are magicians and you walk in and you call something and they're going to magically produce that somehow. And the truth is, that is absolutely not how it works. And they're using references like iReal Pro or like the Real Book or Fake Book. They're using those pieces to help assemble what's going on, but they really do prefer if it is going to be something a little bit different. Now, not in those 3 or 4 keys that you never, ever, ever call, not including, but they do prefer that you know your key and that it isn't one of those bizarre keys. And that if you're calling something, for example, if the iReal Pro or the Real Book, if the version of it is a song that was originally written for a female vocalist, and so it's in that key, and you're coming in as a male vocalist, then they would rather you have the chart or at least know 100% what your key is. And
Okay.
that it's really just it's to keep things frictionless. That's all it is. It's not anybody being unkind. It's not anybody
Right. Right. Right.
trying to in any way be exclusive. It's just, hey, this is a public jam and we want to get into a groove and we want to move through the list. Please don't create speed bumps. So
Right.
those are the kinds of things that happen where somebody gets up and they stand by the piano and they try to sing to the piano player. And
Oh,
these
no.
guys are good enough that oftentimes they will pick that out because they don't want to
Okay.
embarrass the person. They don't want to
Sure.
reject the person and send them back to their seat. They don't want to do that.
Okay.
But often what happens is because I can tell you as a non instrumental singer, if I were left to my own devices to go up there and go, well, this sounds like the right note for the first phrase, I would be wrong more than half the time, and there would be a point at which the song would get too high or too low, and it would be like, "Oh, man, I can't believe I did this." So, yeah, in general, what happens in Indianapolis, Indiana, what happens both there at the Jazz Kitchen and also at other places where there are public jams, and there are several of them in the Indianapolis area. Some of them are connected to university programs that have jazz studies programs.
Yeah.
But a lot of this ripple effect of what happens from the central Indiana connection to a lot of jazz, both legacy jazz and what we think of as traditional pop, a lot of what happens with that creates this broader community in central Indiana and beyond. And I'll just share one thing here really quickly. Thursday nights
Okay.
in Indianapolis, also, there's one
Okay.
at the Chili Water Tap Room. So, Chili Water is a brewing company. That one is really less set up for vocalists, although they will often have a microphone and a speaker there in case somebody does come in that wants to sing, but mostly that's instrumental. It's in small space. The
Yeah.
Mousetrap, bar and restaurant that's been an Indianapolis landmark for many, many years on Keystone, that has I think it's a Tuesday jam that
Okay.
goes from like 9 to midnight typically. And it's one where Rob Dixon and his band, which includes Reggie Bishop and a couple of other folks that, I mean, these are really great players, and they do a jam. And it's also not super vocalist forward, but they will accommodate a vocalist. But there are several of those kinds of jams in central Indiana. And then South Bend has one. Cincinnati, just across the border, has one at a jazz club there.
Okay.
I don't know about what Fort Wayne does, although I know they have a jazz community there. But it's not
Have
that
you
they're.
been to any of those yet?
I've been to the Chili Water Tap
Okay.
Room
Okay.
jam, and
Okay.
then just last week, Purdue University had a student jam that I went to that I think I mentioned.
Okay. You
And
did.
then,
That didn't sound
I've
like
driven as
quite the same
far.
thing.
It isn't, but I've driven as far as Chicago to
Okay.
go to a jam up there a couple of times that is a really excellent, female jazz singer. She's also an instrumentalist. She's a flute player. Her name is Elaine Dame, and her mom was, I think, a flute player in the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, but Elaine grew up around serious music and serious musicians. And she teaches voice lessons and also is a performer. And I mean, she's in the middle of doing a studio project that she just finished the recording of it a couple of weeks ago. But anyway, she was doing vocal jams specifically for singers,
Oh, how
which was
nice.
really very cool because a lot of
Yeah.
that anxiety gets just sort of alleviated from, oh man, I'm coming in here and kind of maybe taking the place of some people that have been working really hard on some instrumental thing.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so I've been to a couple of those where she is, and I've thought more than once about trying to get to the one in Cincinnati. And then, of course, Lafayette, Indiana, here during October and during April on Wednesday nights they're doing a public jam, and it is a jazz jam, but as I said, it spills over into other kinds of genres, and nobody really has any heartburn over that. But yeah, it's a really fun way to meet other people and collaborate on things, and to really get a sense of how you're doing, which is another part of it. It is absolutely built to help people share ideas, and it's just like you talked about in one of the other podcasts about sitting around with people that are really have achieved more and are more accomplished than you are and
Yeah.
what that means. It's like playing ping pong with somebody who's way better or playing tennis or anything else like
That's
that,
a great way to think of
where
it.
you really do come to a point of, in the best possible way, discontent with your current status. Like you walk away from there, and if it's friendly and really community driven, and the one at the
Yeah.
Jazz Kitchen is, you come away even when you don't do well. You come away with all of that energy and excitement for what
Yes.
you're going to do next, and
Yes.
that's to me the mark and maybe one of the things that's unique about that. The gentleman that I was talking to about that said to me what David Ali has there at the Jazz Kitchen, that somebody can walk into that jam and put their name on the list and they're going to get up. If there's time, they're going to get up. That is not that common, especially in larger cities. People need to know who you are. They need to have seen you around. You need to be connected to somebody, or maybe be invited to come by somebody that's part
Yeah.
of the regular cast of people who
Yeah.
sit in. Or if they don't know you, you're just not getting up. If you're not one of the serious cats, you're just not getting up. And Rob Ambrose is the gentleman who said this to me. He's a student of jazz music and a jazz musician himself, and plays piano, plays alto sax, and goes to a lot of the events at the Jazz Kitchen. He's a super cool, very nice man. And he's the one who we were sitting at a concert together at the Jazz Kitchen. I was sitting with him and with his wife, and he just said that to me. He travels a couple times a year to New York City, goes to the major, very world famous jazz rooms there, sees a lot of what goes on even in some of the jazz sessions, and he just said, "I'm telling you, what's here in Indianapolis that's available for us, it is not that common." And so it's a really cool thing. I think it's a reflection, of course, of who David Ali is. It's a reflection of
Yeah.
what Central
Sure.
Indiana feels like,
Sure.
and of all of these programs, these highly skilled educators who are really, really driving students to achieve in a genre that's never going to make them rich and famous, but it really is
Right.
emotionally and intellectually challenging and very satisfying. And
Yeah.
it's a cool thing
Yeah.
to see and to
Yeah.
be in the really in the slipstream of that. It really is.
Creating the vibe of the room with the music
Yeah.
that you're doing, and to think about that as a refined thing, and it doesn't have to be jazz to be refined, it
No,
can
of
be
course not.
like, but I love that that's going
Yeah.
on.
And well, and the cool thing about how it works, at least in my experience, is if you get up and you're a beginning instrumentalist and you've worked really, 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 really hard on playing through Autumn Leaves, and all you're going to do is play through the melody one time, and it's a,
Sure.
it's a short form. And if that's all you're really going to do is play Autumn Leaves one time and then let the rest of the musicians that are up there do their solos and do other things,
Fine.
and then get back to you playing the melody exactly as you played it the first time, the last time, with some sort of an ending, that is a completely legitimate thing
Yes.
to do. You don't have to improvise, you don't have to wow
Right.
anybody,
Right.
and everybody will give you an attaboy as you're walking down from the stage, because you started the process by going, I've learned enough to know that Autumn Leaves is part of this.
Yeah,
And that's
right.
really what this is about. It's not that other genres or other songs, and there are amazing genres and amazing songs that achieve so much more than modern jazz does. But that is a part of this. It's the keepers of that particular flame. And this is one of those places where the the flame is a little more finely tuned than other places, that, like you say, with a bluegrass jam or like the Lafayette jam here, where there may be some other genres and people are welcome to come do that, and nobody's ever going to say anything. The Jazz Kitchen is one of those places where it's enough of a keeper of the flame that if they recognize that you're about to do a third country western song, they're probably going
Right.
to ask you to be done.
Right.
Not because they're unkind, but because it really is a misappropriation of
Right,
that
that's right.
event.
That
It's not an open mic night, it's
I'm
a
all for
jazz
it.
jam, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
No,
anyway, and they do it in a very respectful way, in a very
sure.
quiet
Sure, sure,
way
sure.
that minimizes discomfort.